called Fog Ransomware. But before we get started, my name is Sam Ayers. I'm a security researcher at Beazley Security. I mainly track ransomware threat actors, not really a specific one, just all of them, because all of them are really interesting. And then
I'm Bobby. I'm a principal security researcher at Beazley Security, and I fill gaps, but I have a background in malware analysis.
So before we get started, let's just talk about ransomware as a whole. Ransomware is a malicious software that either blocks access to your computer or encrypts data until a ransom is paid. And nowadays, it's really just crypto. Yay. A lot of different ways ransomware threat actors get into the network. A lot of it is compromised credentials. There is phishing, brute force, tons of different ways. Different threat actors use different ways. Today, we're going to be talking about Fog. So, Fog started at the end of May 2024, beginning of June 2024, so they've only been around for a couple of months. So far, there has been 32 companies that have been publicly shamed that they have been pwned. This graphic and data was from a couple of days ago, as in 10/22 that I made this, right? Well, I lied because this morning I had to update it because now there's 40 victims, unfortunately, mainly targeting the US, about 70% publicly known, right? Mainly targeting also education sector, which really sucks. A lot of it is under like elementary, middle school, but also we have secondary, college, and universities. Other industries are hit as well: finance, manufacturing, food service, food production, things like that, as well as victims in other countries like Canada, Australia, Netherlands, and other ones. So I'm going to quickly go over the kill chain right now of one of the examples of our IR team had to deal with. It's not the same for every case, not the same for every Fog attack, but it's similar, mainly the same TTPs we're seeing. So we have a threat actor. He uses compromised VPN credentials. They get that by either brute forcing it or buying it from an info stealer. So info stealers are still a really big deal, and we need to handle that. That's a whole different talk, but let's deal with that later. Then the threat actor used pass a hash against administrator accounts, which subsequently gives established RDP access into the Windows server. RDP is Windows Desktop Protocol, which is a protocol that allows control of other computers remotely. And then they use SMB. SMB is Server Message Block, which is a message format used for sharing files and directories in a Windows environment. They use RDP, SMP, and PSExec in an attempt for internal spread of the network. After that, they disable Windows Defender, so Defender doesn't catch anything they're about to do. They download the ransomware, and they deploy the ransomware. They deploy it using a PowerShell script in a hypervised environment that encrypts VMDK files, which are virtual machine desktop files. They also delete backup Vim storage. They encrypt, which also delete volume storage and encrypt both local and shared network resources.
Okay, and then I'm going to speak a little bit about analysis of the locker file itself. So within the context of ransomware, a locker file is, that's the executable that the threat actors will drop onto your machine or your network once they get there. And when they execute that, that's what actually does the ransoming. It will encrypt all your files, it drops the ransom note, and then does all that stuff. So really important to understand these. As we had mentioned, Fog is not a very noisy group. The big boys like Lockbit and Akira and Ransom Hub, those guys they'll have waves where they'll own like 30 different companies in a weekend. Fog is very quiet. We're not really sure why. We're still kind of tracking them, but they'll have a wave of like 7 companies that they compromise. So they're hard to track because there's just not a lot of information and not a lot of samples. Around May, Arctic Wolf released a really good article about their analysis of Fog, and it's pretty comprehensive. They mentioned a couple samples and gave a couple of hashes, but unfortunately for us, only one of them was available, but we'll take what we can get. So we grabbed that sample, we took a look at it. The first thing we noticed is that, first off, AV companies, way back in May, a few of them were already labeling these samples as fog. So some researchers out there already knew what fog looked like, and they were tagging it. It's good for us because you can search in VirusTotal on that tag. And so we found, we did that search, and we pulled up 7 more samples. Hooray. I know this graph looks a little strange. Basically, what I'm showing you here is that from May to November, spoiler alert, we were able to find 20 samples. We believe that that's the entirety of the public sample set for fog. And I'm basically going to walk you through our long walk to get to from 7 samples to the 20. Okay. So with the 7 samples, we needed to study them and understand how we could possibly detect them and search for them. The first thing we noticed is that Arctic Wolf, in their blog post, they mentioned that fog will helpfully drop a debug file that has debug log statements in it, which is super weird, right? But it's for the operators. And what will happen is their affiliates who are using their ransomware, sometimes it doesn't work right, and that log file is to help them debug what's going on. It's helpful for us too, though, because it happens that in fog, they don't hide any of their strings. They don't encrypt any of the log stuff, and you can just search on them. So we started with that. The other thing that we noticed is that, so on the right side is a snippet of code from fog. I know you probably can't read it. That's okay. Really, all you got to know is that on the right side there, this is a decision tree. When it gets to the middle, if it turns out that if you ran it but didn't give it any parameters, it will just exit out. But if you pass it parameters, it starts doing evil stuff. You'll see it, if you can maybe squint your eyes, you can see at the bottom there, it will start closing services and killing processes and doing very mean things, right? But what that told us was that on any given fog sample, even if it doesn't run right, it will still drop the log file. So that is a good behavior to do threat hunts and searches off of. So we did that. Now, with the combination of the static search and the behavior search, we created signatures and searches off those in VirusTotal, and we're able to pull about 19 samples. So we're getting better. Okay. I want to dive into one of the samples that turned up here that was actually kind of interesting. So there's a zip file that got turned up when we did this search. This zip file had the fog ransomware embedded inside of it, but it was next to a bunch of really weird looking things. There's like a bunch of applications here. You'll see Cafion, CodeSector, Iperius. These are applications that do file transfer and backup facilities. And that's very common with threat actors that are deploying ransomware. They want to steal all of your data before they ransom it because they're going to double extort you. They'll do the ransom, but then they'll also have all your data and tell us you got to pay us this ransom too, or else we're going to leak all your data on a leak site. So this is likely like what that stuff was. Also, there's an ntuser.dat file. I'm not a pen tester, but I took a class once, and I think the ntuser.dat file, it has recon information in it. It has like user information that you can enumerate when you're attacking the system. And then the locker was right in there, right? The other thing that was interesting was that on this specific system that this zip file was created for, they had installed an advanced IP scanner. And that caught my attention because within the Arctic Wolf report, they said that one of the utilities that they use is called Advanced Host Scanner. And this thing is named the same. And when I looked at the websites, they looked similar. So I think I'm pretty sure this was a fog threat actor case. And what this started to look like, this is basically the digital equivalent of a crime scene, right? Usually what happens is if ransomware is deployed, when the incident response team comes in, they'll package up the stuff they need to study and lift it off site, and then they'll study it there. And what we think happened was this organization uploaded that package to VirusTotal just to check it or whatever. And probably the most interesting thing we found is that VirusTotal had reported that this thing was uploaded from Brazil on 7/29. What makes that interesting is that we've been tracking fog cases, and there's no mention of Brazilian one. So this company either paid the ransom or is a non-publicly known case. And also the zip file, when it was uploaded, it matched the name of a software services company in Brazil. So super interesting finding, right? Okay, let's get back to the 7 samples. All right, so we needed to find something that sort of ties all those samples together. My colleague Sam showed me this really cool feature where there's you can ask VirusTotal, hey, show me, here's 7 samples, show me the similarities in all these samples. And VirusTotal will say, oh, like, here's this byte pattern that happens to be in 4 of the samples, or here's a byte pattern that shows up in 5 of the samples. Well, this search showed us 9 byte patterns that show up in all 7 of the samples that we were studying, which is super cool. And I'm sorry, BSides, I'm not going to draw 120 arrows and circles in there for you. But you know what, like, you can imagine what it was supposed to look like, right? So those 9 samples, when we studied them, some of those byte patterns weren't related to anything. They were like strings or data structures within the file. But 4 of them, every time I saw them in any sample, they were very close together. And they were in, again, all 7 samples. So the first thing that tells me is this is a very interesting and important piece of code within FOG. So we made a signature out of it, and we started to study it. Now, to know what it was doing, we had to dive in and then like slowly work our way back out. So what it is in any given FOG sample, there's a section of code that, again, looks like this. I showed this graph earlier. What's happening here is the program starts, it unpacks its internal configuration, it reads it, and then it starts doing horrible things, killing services, killing processes, and all that. That's where those 2 log files are. That unpack part that unpacks the encrypted internal configuration, it looks not too bad like this, but there is one section in there that looks like this, and that's where those 4 shared code patterns are. And so this thing, those 4 shared pieces of code that are present in every FOG sample, it's related to the unpacking of its internal configuration. That's an important piece of code because that internal configuration tells FOG it's got its internal, the RSA key it uses to encrypt your stuff. It tells it like, where it needs to go search on your files or on your system to look for stuff to encrypt. So important piece of code. So we made a signature out of it and ran it. And to our delight, it fires on all the executable samples, so it's a good signature, and it doesn't fire on anything else, so it's a safe signature. It doesn't create false positives. So this code, these 4 shared code bits are essentially a fingerprint for FOG. You can use this to like flag whether or not a sample is actually FOG. And then one really interesting thing happened. So we had these 19 samples that we found from previous searches. This fingerprint signature found one more sample. It's called Unlocker. And if anyone's worked with ransomware before, typically what happens is after you've been ransomed, the ransomware gang will tell you, pay us this ransom and we'll give your stuff back. If you pay it, often what will happen is they'll send you an unlocker file that has your key embedded in it that will release your stuff for you. And this thing caught the FOG unlocker. The reason that we couldn't see it before with our other searches, it has the same debug log structure in it, but it has fewer log strings. We had previously used a threshold of 60, and this thing has less than that. That's why it flew under the radar for that signature. And then for behavior-wise, it drops its debug logger like the other sample, but it appends unlocker to it, which is why we didn't see it previously. But our fingerprint signature worked fine. The other really cool thing is that the unlocker, no AV companies as of yet are flagging it as FOG. So this is something that we found unique in the unlocker. So we're very happy with that. Yeah, the fingerprint works. And so what's fun about the fingerprint, Sam had showed you things that we found that it's still firing off. We're still finding things like this week. Earlier this week, the fingerprint caught a few more unlocker samples. This one is specifically uploaded from Ireland, and we haven't seen any public reports of a compromised victim from Ireland. So it's helping us track activities for FOG.
So we're going to talk about some TTPs and IOCs, everyone's favorite part. I'm not going to bore you guys. I'll run through this fairly quickly. So initial access, they use VPN credentials like I talked about before. They either info stealer or brute force it. They get a Windows shell for the RDP and SMB, which we talked about earlier and go over in a minute. Persistence, they create a local administrator account to help excavate their privilege. They delete files. They disable Windows Defender, all the standard things with ransomware, but specifically they use something called pass the hash. Pass the hash is stolen hashes that will help them move laterally later, and they won't have access to, they don't need the clear text password, they just use that hash and enumerate it, and so that's one of the ways they use. For credential access, they brute force and password stuffing, as well as they steal passwords from password managers in conjunction with the pass the hash. They use port scanners and network scanners. They use RDP and SMB and other lateral tools. And then like every other ransomware, they stop services, they inhibit system recovery, and they encrypt the data. So a lot of tools that FOG use are open source tooling, or just native tooling. So they use Metasploit, they use network scanning and port scanning, which you could just look up the names. They are free. You just hit the download button and it downloads. And then they also use an open source script called Vim Get Creds, which helps them steal the credentials from password managers. So I just added a screenshot of one of the ransom notes that they did. At the beginning of their activities, their ransom note was called helpyourfiles.html, which was really interesting because most ransom notes are not .html, most of them are .txt, but now they're back to most ransom groups and they named theirs readme.txt. And then on the right, they pretty much, hey, we're FOG, we take responsibility, go to download Tor, go to this link, enter this code. I'm not giving anyone the code. And then you could chat with us for our own little chat room. And then let's negotiate / pay us the money pretty much. And then for encryption file extensions, like I said before, at the beginning, they used .flock, but that was a little bit weird to track because that wasn't the name or anything similar, but now they're using .fog. And then this is a photo of their name and shame site. So they run 2 Tor sites. One is their chat room site, and one is their Tor name and shame site, which is pretty much any victim that does not pay the ransom. They get pretty much put on here, and you could just download their data. So it's really funny because they can't spell it's right, and that's been for a very long time, and I kind of want to message and let them know, but I think it's funnier that it stays that way. But yeah. So just some closing thoughts. Why should any of you guys care? Ransom's hitting every industry. Maybe not FOG specifically is hitting your industry, but ransom groups are hitting every industry everywhere, from technology companies to education to food service to everything, right? And if we're not educating and talking about it, it's going to keep happening. And the biggest thing we need to do is stop paying the ransoms. This is feeding them, right? Once we pay them, it is pretty much giving them more money to operate. They operate as a company. They get employees, they buy servers, they buy all this stuff, and we give them money, they're able to increase their strength and keep on going. So if we stop paying them, first they'll stop doing it because they're not making money, and second they'll stop doing it because they can't afford to keep doing it. So that's just something we need to do as a whole.
And then also, there's just a lot more things for us to investigate. We haven't done full analysis coverage of the FOG sample itself, so there's probably a lot of other cool things in there. And we also have a Linux sample for FOG too, which we haven't covered here. But they use that to ransom your ESXi servers, which is super scary if it happens to your org. But yeah, we're a fairly new research organization, and so when the IR team that we support came to us and said, "Have you guys heard of FOG?" and we were like, "No," we had to like quickly pull together and figure out how to track and study these guys. And so this was the process that we kind of built out. We're excited to apply this process to the big boys, right? We want to study the like Lockbit this way, or Akira or whatever. And the other thing that we've noticed too is that in the past month or so, there's a bunch of really new ransomware groups popping up. There's names that we see. There was a name that I saw like 3 days ago that I had never seen before. So there's always new ransom groups. So having a process in place to really quickly get your arms around who these guys are, I think is very valuable. And if you want to study ransomware, come chat with us. We're easy to talk to.
And then lastly, unfortunately, our blog post was not able to come out today, but it will be up next week. So if you go scan this QR code, or if you don't like QR codes, you can go to that link. That is our GitHub page, and we posted all of the YAR rules that we used, as well as all of the IOCs that we have found and gathered on our GitHub, and then we'll link our blog post, which goes way more into depth, as well as a lot more other fun things as well, and then also our contact. Does anyone have any questions? To my knowledge, we have not. The big thing that we try to stress to both our customers and as a whole is don't pay the ransom. There's no guarantee that if you pay the ransom, they're going to give you the locker. They're not going to post it. They're not going to double extort. They're not going to do anything, right? You're just pretty much giving them money. They already got you. It doesn't matter. They could double extort you. So the idea is to just not let them just don't pay, and I think that's just a systematic thing we need to change, but overall.
I think too, we've been discussing this within our team, but the other thing that we think is contributing to the rise of like smaller ransomware groups, the government, the U.S. government actually sanctions U.S. ransomware groups by name. So like Lockbit is on the sanction group. And so it creates this really bizarre situation where if you get ransomed by Lockbit, it's actually against the law for you to pay the ransom. Like you will get busted by the FBI for paying it out to get your stuff back. And that hurts, well, it hurts the customer, the clients obviously, but it also hurts the ransomware groups because then they can't get ransoms from US companies. But those sanctions are built off of just the name alone. So the way to get around that is you make a new name for yourself. And so we're thinking that might be one of the reasons why there's this explosion of new ransomware groups. But it's not verified, it's just something that we've been looking.
So the one similarity, and we go over this in our blog post, is they're very similar to Akira. It seems like it's an offshoot of Akira. They have a lot of similar TTPs, a lot of similar tooling, a lot of things similar, but they do a couple of things different. I mean, the fundamentals of ransomware, they're all fairly the same. They get in, they encrypt your stuff, and they demand money. But those little things are what separates them. But yeah.
So the Linux samples that we've seen, we actually had a case where the Linux sample was what was used, and they're using it to attack ESXi servers, because there's a lot of cases now where on premises companies will be having a bunch of their servers just run from ESXi, and so if you ransom it at that level, you get all of the VMs that were running there. That's what that sample is for, and we're still sort of studying through that sample, and we'll update our blog as we understand it more. For Beazley Security, our parent company is an insurance company that pays out cyber insurance, and they have all of that structure in place so that if something does happen to a customer, they have a huge Rolodex of contact books to help their specific clients do that. We don't have to worry too much about that. We're the research guys. We just bury ourselves in binaries and threat intelligence. So, well. And most of, unfortunately, so we support an IR team, and a disturbing amount of the IR cases that lead to ransomware, they're from stolen passwords. You go to Breached, or you go to all those leak sites, and you buy a password, and then suddenly you're in Snowflake. I don't know if you guys remember the Snowflake breach from earlier this year. That was a bought password. They got in there from a password that they bought on some site for like $100, and then it caused millions of dollars in damage. So.